Hello and welcome to the Argyle CIO Leadership Summit, Building the AI-Ready Enterprise Infrastructure, Workflows, and IT Operations. My name is Michael with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit the virtual booths from the main agenda page. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Also be sure to subscribe to Argyle on YouTube for exclusive access to all our past events. And now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Erich Gazaui, Chief Information Officer with Papa. We are excited to have Erich with us for a keynote presentation titled The Ceiling You Buy, the Discipline Behind Every AI Investment. Erich, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Michael, for having me. I want to start with a machine that most of us have likely never touched, a typewriter. Typing class taught mechanical input. English class taught structured thought and clear prose. When the word processor arrived, both skills transferred completely. Output improved, faster, cleaner, easier to revise, but the human capability required to produce something worth reading did not change. The tool was a delivery mechanism. The skill lived inside the person. Email extended the same pattern, same writing skill, same thinking skill, now transmitted electronically. Search added retrieval, but required no new upstream capability. Every one of these transitions was safe because the required skill already existed before the tool arrived. That pattern held for decades. It held so reliably that it became invisible. We stopped noticing it was even a pattern. AI breaks this pattern, and it breaks it in a specific way that most organizations in this room have not fully priced in. A typewriter demanded that you could type. A word processor demanded that you could write something worth processing. Every prior tool was neutral. It did not compensate for the absence of skill. The gap was visible immediately to the person using it. AI is conversational. It accepts imprecise direction. It responds fluently, regardless of the quality of the input it receives. It does not expose the gap. It fills around it. Someone with no clarity about what they are trying to accomplish can spend an extended session with an AI system, receive polished, confident output, and never once encounter the signal that something is wrong. This is not a flaw in the technology. Ease of entry is the entire value proposition. And that same ease of entry is what makes the skill gap invisible at the exact moment that it matters most. I'm going to name that gap this afternoon, and I'm going to show you where it shows up twice. Once, small, inside a single prompt where the cost is a wasted afternoon. And once large, inside the biggest AI platform decision your organization will make this year, where the cost is a ceiling you will not see until you hit it. And by then, changing course costs several times what it would have cost to see it coming. The skill that closes this gap has a name. I call it intentioning, not prompting, not AI literacy in the way most vendors use that phrase. Intentioning is the practiced capacity to externalize your intent clearly enough before you engage that a highly capable, highly compliant system cannot dilute it, redirect it, or complete it in a direction you did not choose. The word is deliberate in the same way adulting is deliberate. It names an active practice, not a credential. You do not possess intention the way you possess a certification. You do intentioning. It is ongoing, it is contextual, and it requires discipline precisely because the tool will never demand it of you. Nothing in the interface asks you to do this work. That is exactly why most people skip it. Let me give you the version of this that plays out in the strategy room, and then the version that is likely playing out in yours. Scenario 1. A senior leader has been thinking about employee retention for weeks. She opens an AI tool and types, Help me build a retention strategy. The system responds immediately with a clean, well-structured document covering compensation benchmarking, career pathing, manager training, recognition programs, and of course, exit interview analysis. It reads like something a consulting firm would have delivered. She shares it with their team. They start executing. 6 weeks later, after a real effort, she recognizes the strategy never touched the actual problem. What she needed, what she had been circling in her own thinking for weeks, but never once said out loud, was not a general retention strategy. It was a specific answer to why her highest performers were leaving within 18 months of promotion. That was the question. She never asked it. The system never asked her to clarify it. And because the output looked authoritative, nobody on her team noticed the gap until they were deep inside the wrong work. A typewriter would have not written that strategy for her. Neither would a word processor. Both would have sat there blank, waiting for her to produce something herself. The AI produced something on her behalf, and it did so with enough polish that the absence of intentioning stayed invisible until the cost had already been paid. Scenario 2, and this one belongs to this room specifically. An infrastructure team is under pressure to reduce mean time to resolution on production incidents. Someone points an AI system at the last 12 months of incident tickets and asks it to build an automated triage and response runbook. Within a day, they have something impressive. Categorization logic, suggested remediation steps, auto-escalation rules, a really clean interface. Leadership sees the demo and loves it. It ships. 3 months in, the team notices something. MTTR and tickets the system was trained against has genuinely improved. But the incidents that actually damage the business, the rare, high-severity, cross-system failures that do not resemble last year's ticket history, are getting worse handling, not better, because the automation now sits between the engineer and the raw signal, filtering it through categories built for the common case. Nobody asked before building it, what failure mode are we actually trying to prevent? They asked, can we reduce ticket volume? Those are different questions. The system answered the one it was given, faithfully, and the one they actually needed went unaddressed for a full quarter before anyone noticed the drift. Different room, same failure. In both cases, the tool was fluent and the direction was absent, and that combination does not save time. It only delays the bill. The discipline that prevents both of these is not complicated, but it is uncomfortable because it requires stopping before you feel productive. Before you open the tool, before you write the first prompt, answer a prior question. Rather than thinking about the output, instead think, what outcome tells me this engagement actually succeeded? Those two are different questions, and the distance between those is exactly the distance between fluent AI use and productive AI use. That is intentioning at the individual level. It is learned by anyone willing to build the habit of stopping before engaging. The stopping is the skill. Everything after it gets easier. Now I want to take the same discipline and scale it up to the decision every person likely owns in this room personally. Here's the question that matters for the rest of this talk. What happens when an entire organization skips this discipline? Not inside a single prompt, but at the moment of its largest AI commitment. Not a retention strategy, not a run book, a platform decision that the organization will be living inside for the next 5 years. The failure mode is identical. Someone fills the vacuum with fluent, confident motion, and no one stops to name the outcome before committing. The only difference is scale, and at scale, the cost of an unnamed outcome stops being a wasted quarter. It becomes architecture. I call this the ceiling that you buy. Every organization in this room believes it is deploying AI. What most are actually doing is making a stack entry decision. And that decision determines a ceiling you will not see until you hit it. There are two ceilings. One is set by the vendor whose product you purchased, and the other is set by the internal capacity your organization brought to building directly on the underlying model. Both are invisible at the moment of decision. Both are products of the same purchase. I want to use an analogy that has traveled well with executive audiences. A finished enterprise AI product, the category that includes a tool like Cursor, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, is called a cake. It arrives professionally baked. It runs on a foundational model that your organization never touches directly. The product layer determines what is possible for your organization. The cake is the product. The frosting is what your organization adds on top. Workflows, infrastructure integration, security scaffolding, the operational layer that lives around the tool. That is real work and it matters. But it is bounded by what the cake allows. Conversely, ingredients are direct access to the model provider itself without a product sitting in between. Maximum freedom of form. You can build whatever you know how to build, but you also have to become your own expert baker before any of that frosting matters. And the cake you produce has to hold up against the other professionally baked cakes on the market. The choice every organization is making, whether it recognizes it or not, is whether to buy the cake or buy the ingredients. Both are purchases, but they buy different things, and most procurement processes are not framed to notice the difference. The vendor ceiling. A bank licenses an enterprise AI research copilot. Year one is fast, professional, and accurate. Then the bank's actual edge, which is its proprietary research methodology, becomes its own limiting factor. The tool cannot be taught that methodology because the prompt scaffolding is bounded by the product design rather than the bank's needs. The custom integration that the bank actually requires has been on the vendor's roadmap for 3 quarters. The bank is now running a fully deployed system that produces output professionally indistinguishable from every other bank using the same tool. The ceiling arrived late, it arrived architecturally, and it sits entirely outside the bank's control. Switching is no longer cheap. The capability is in production. The cake is the limit. The internal ceiling. A mid-sized firm commits to building directly on the substrate. 2 strong engineers, 6 months worth of work, and they have something that approximates 1 seat of an enterprise product. What they do not have is enterprise authentication, audit trails, eval harnesses, prompt versioning, model deprecation handling, observability, incident response, the controls a mature organization or environment require. The capability ships and it breaks in production in ways the team simply cannot diagnose. Because the product team, while fluent, is working with the platform team, which is the one the firm did not realize it needed, and they cannot keep pace. The firm purchased ingredients. It also purchased, without naming it, the unstated requirement to staff and operate a professionally baking team. That requirement never appeared in the procurement decision because it was framed as a tool selection. Notice the pattern. The vendor ceiling surfaces in production after the organization has scaled around the tool. The internal ceiling surfaces in development after engineering capacity has already been committed. The timing is different and the cost lands differently, but the root cause is the same in both cases. Nobody named the ceiling at the moment of decision because it was coded as something else. It was coded as tool selection, which is bounded and familiar in its engineering work. It was not coded as a capability commitment, which is a decision that belongs at a higher altitude than the room where it usually gets made. That is the part of the conversation nobody wants to say out loud. The people making this decision, CTOs, heads of engineering, even single engineers with strong vendor preferences, they are very competent at tool selection. But they are not being asked to make a stack-angry decision because the framing of it as that decision does not exist in the room. The result is a CIO, a CEO, or even a board that approve an investment believing they are approving a strategy. The ceiling shows up later, and by then, changing course costs several times what naming it at the outset would have cost. Here's the connection I want to leave you with because it is the reason these two ideas belong in the same room. Intentioning at an individual level is a single question asked before you open the tool. What outcome would tell me this engagement succeeded, rather than focusing on the output that you want? The ceiling at the organizational level is the same question asked before you sign. Which ceiling are we choosing to operate under, not which product looked best in the demo? It is the same discipline applied at a different altitude. And the organizations that get this right tend to do three things. First, they recode the decision before making it. AI stack entry is a capability decision, not a procurement one. And it needs to be held at the altitude where that framing can actually live. And for your most consequential bets, that means the CIO, and in some cases, the board. Second, they audit the capacity before signing. Before buying the cake, they audit the platform engineering depth, the eval discipline, the compliance scaffolding, because those determine how high the frosting can go. Before buying the ingredients, audit the same things, because the internal ceiling is exactly the absence of those capabilities. And last, they choose deliberately, with the ceiling named. Either choice can be correct, depending on your market position and your internal capacity. The discipline is not choosing the higher ceiling. It is choosing with the ceiling visible at the moment of decision, rather than discovering it later, after the cost of changing courses has multiplied. I opened with a typewriter because it never wrote anything on its own. It waited blankly for a person to bring direction to it. AI does not wait. It will fill any gap you leave open, confidently, fluently, and at whatever scale you hand it, inside a single prompt or inside a 5-year platform commitment. The discipline that protects you is the same one at both scales. Name the outcome before you engage. Name the ceiling before you sign. That is not a technology question. It is an operating discipline, and it belongs to every leader in this room, whether the decision is in front of you this quarter for a single prompt or the biggest AI investment your organization will ever make. Thank you very much. I see that there is questions.
Thank you, Eric. Should we move into the questions? Should I read them?
Sure. I'm seeing them here. The first question is, what practical discipline helps leaders externalize their intent before engaging systems that will fill any gap left open? I think the practical discipline is really about understanding success criteria. In my talk, I named it the outcome, how you map that outcome to understand that the engagement that you're practicing and that you're about to embark upon will be successful. It's the success criteria. Enumerate those as best as possible. And that really applies, as we said, at both levels, but certainly at the individual ceiling, the internal approach, the single prompt. Understand the success criteria, or build it if necessary. The second question, how does the same discipline that applies to large platform choices also apply to everyday AI use, such as individual prompts? So those are different in a sense, but they are somewhat of a same concept, as mentioned earlier. When you think about individual prompting and you think about slowing or stopping, that's the skill to practice. Understand the success criteria, the outcome that you're aiming for, the outcome that will tell you that the engagement that you're about to practice is going to be successful or will be successful when it's reached. When you think about the ceiling concept at an organizational level, at a scale level, think similarly. Have a plan around which ceiling, which limit do you want to be under, because we'll be under that. We'll be under one of those limits, and it can be designed or chosen appropriately for your organization. But be very specific, be deliberate. Say, we're going to follow the roadmap of the vendor, and we're going to trail that, or we're going to determine that our ceiling is something we want internally to be able to control. And what that will mean, obviously, is that you'll need to staff internally and build the capability in order to prevent the ceiling internally from holding you back when it matters most. Question 3, what advice would you give CIOs who feel pressure to move quickly on AI, but want to avoid locking in constraints they will regret later? This is a common question, a very, very powerful question. A year ago, actually, probably at this point, a little bit longer than that, my CIO or my CEO said the exact same thing. Where's the AI? Why aren't we having AI? Let's go faster, AI. And I said, please let me design and implement a plan. Have it be something that has milestones, success criteria, and have it demonstrate that we will see what we want to see when we reach the end or any one of those milestones. It took political capital, I will tell you. It took arguments, perhaps, but ultimately I was given the flexibility, the room to build that plan, demonstrate that I had a vision, had an idea about where we wanted to be, and slowly and methodically rolled out certain tooling and concepts. Today, I think one of the more powerful areas that AI is being deployed is in service management. Traditionally, we've all called that as ITSM, but I look at it as a little broader than that. I think when you have an organization, most groups have a component of service management. The more traditional groups like the ones we all manage, IT or the people team, they're very accustomed to being a service bureau. But really every part of the organization has that component. So thinking in those terms, think about how when a person is going to ask another part of the organization for output or for a report or something similar, think in terms of how do you route that through a service management tool. And conversely, the same inbound. You get asked questions, a lot of them are repetitive. Think about how we can apply service management. Ticket deflection is, of course, the primary objective, or certainly has been for years. But today, we can move past traditional ticket deflection into operational and task-based responses that give users more self-service. Driving that as a vision, driving knowledge-based rationalization, centralization, and maintenance will give the confidence that your senior leadership needs, your CEO otherwise, to believe that you actually have this plan and that you will get there. That's the best advice I can give you. It's what I deployed, and I will say we are enjoying success today as a result. And yes, the pressure is there. Believe me, I know. Where have you seen organizations most often discover their limits of their AI stack decisions too late? And what is the cost? I see that most commonly at the, I'm going to refer to my analogy, the ingredients layer, because the tools are so prevalent and so inexpensive, and depending on your current stack, you might get access to these tools as a result of having other tools, whether it be your productivity suite or email, etc. You're going to have access to one of these tools. What ends up becoming the expectation is that personal productivity can increase fairly rapidly and materially. The organization benefits from that. Teams, individuals, the broader company, we see that benefit. The next assumption that is typically made at that time is, how do we take that tool, the output, the kind of iterative design and conversation, and put it in production? I'm sure many of you have heard that multiple times. How do you take that and put it in production? Well, that's where you're hitting that internal ceiling. And that's when organizations like all of the ones we run here, we realize, oh, hey, we don't have that internal capacity. We don't even have infrastructure for it. We're going to have to build it or buy it or some combination of that. We're going to have to staff. And from a timing point of view, usually that's going to trail 3 or 6 months behind the desired outcome of whatever initiative was being done at that personal productivity layer. That's the one I see most common. And it is costly because what was expected, what was budgeted for, certainly if you're mid-year, missed the idea of those internal capacities. And now the company, especially senior leadership, has a very difficult decision. Do we slow or even pause rolling further productivity out at that individual level? Or do we go back to the board and ask for funds to be able to staff internally and to build that infrastructure? Either way, it's extremely timely, and it costs both in time and in money. And generally speaking, it degrades the confidence that your senior leadership has in your leadership or your organizational approach. And that is why you put all that together. It's the most costly. It's the one I see the most common. Let's see. Looking ahead, what separates organizations that deliberately set and manage their AI ceilings from those that discover them only after significant investment? I will say that we all know or believe we can understand what would be a typical return on investments in various different AI tools. And as mentioned earlier, personal productivity is very quick to give response and to give return, and powerful. But as that begins to scale and spread through the organization, the challenge becomes, how do we take that at the organizational level and translate it into measurable goals that then translate into approaches by senior leadership, whether that's going to be budget, resource allocation, project initiation, or prioritization. The organizations that get this right, or at least work on getting it right, will start to see those large benefits sooner. And it gives senior leadership the ability to internalize those returns and fold them into the plan for the next year or for the major initiatives that they're contemplating. Those changes, those benefits, cause the organization to be able to move quicker. And I'm going to give one example because I think it's something we're all dealing with in this room. Staff augmentation or staff deflection. When we have internal automation, self-service, tooling, knowledge, when these things are working well, the need for internal staff in the support teams starts to lessen. Do it better, it lessens more. Where you get alignment with your finance team and with your board is when you can demonstrate that the scale that you've built within these tools now allows the company to grow in revenue, to grow in staff count, to grow in geographic area, and the teams internally that support all of that growth grow a fraction. What used to be for all of us a fairly traditional industry standard of, in an IT group, say 100 to 1, we're cutting that in half. We're cutting that down so much so we can have 200 to 1, 300 to 1 because of these tools. So the organizations that get these ceilings correct definitely have a leg up in those scenarios. I think that is the last question. So we'll turn it back to Michael.
Thank you, Eric. This is a wonderful keynote and appreciate you being here. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. And finally, thank you again to our sponsor, SAP. Now, this session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Now, this officially concludes the Argyle CIO Leadership Summit, Building the AI-Ready Enterprise, Infrastructure, Workflows, and IT Operations. Thank you again for joining us today and engaging in our content. We look forward to seeing you at our next Argyle Digital event soon, which will be our CFO Summit on September 3rd. Have a great rest of your day. And Eric, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.